it's Mazzy and welcome back. This episode is 1967, according to Robyn Hitchcock and me. Now, Robyn Hitchcock put this album out recently. He covers some of his favorite songs from the year. What a great year in pop music and rock music and psychedelic music, in freak folk music. We didn't even call it freak folk music. Well, he put this album out recently, and at the same time, parallel, a memoir of 1967. Now, this covers growing up with his family, and then it gets into 1966 and 1967. That is the crux of it, his personal growing, his coming of age, and of course, getting introduced to music. That is the center of this. It keeps going back to music. It's not all about music, but everything comes back to music. And I tell you, I want to tell you one thing right off the bat. I am fucking jealous of this book because if you've been watching my channel, I have a series called Memories of a Vinyl Junkie. Now, if you haven't, there's an entire playlist, and I urge you, if you like this sort of video, where I get into music and personal anecdotes and where I was at the time, right place, right the time, in my case, San Francisco, born in San Francisco, almost all that period up to 10 years ago, lived in San Francisco or very close to San Francisco, and was entrenched in the psychedelic music and the sounds of the city, as well as the British invasion, obviously, and the Beatles and the Kinks and so many other bands. And I loved reading this. Now, this isn't the way that I would do it, but that's why it's so great, because this is what Robyn Hitchcock did. And if you don't know his music, you owe it to yourself to check it out. In the late 70s, he was in a band. He started a band. He was the main songwriter for the Soft Boys. And then in 81, I believe, he went solo. And there was various incarnations of his groups and solo projects and various labels, Robyn Hitchcock and the Egyptians, and a lot of really wonderful music. And his stature, he's a tall guy. I'm thinking 6'3" or something. And he's kind of a big guy. And he's got now this beautiful white hair that curls down behind it on the side. And he's got this tenor, this kind of high voice. And if you've never seen him live, it's really interesting seeing him when that voice coming out. He's got that perfectly pure, popish voice, and he's an amazing songwriter. So his songwriting is very colorful, very descriptive. I mean, influences obviously are early Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett right off the bat. He's a big fan of Bob Dylan. I'm going to talk about that. But what I really want to do is talk about this album. I'm going to go through the album, all the tracks, and showcase the originals. I have all but one original of the songs that he decided to include on here. Talk a little bit about the book, which I really enjoyed. It's a quick read. I think I read it in one day and a half, maybe, on and off, but it's really, it touches me. But if you like this style of video and storytelling, go to that playlist I have here, Memories of a Vinyl Junkie, where I go through various years, talk about where I was, what I was going through, and the music I was listening to and inspired by. And it's right in this wheelhouse. And of course, so being jealous of something like this is not a negative thing. It's wonderful. Obviously, I can't sing, I can't write songs like this, and his incredible songs that he's done on previous albums. Obviously, this is all covers of the great songs of the period. So I'm going to go through this record track by track and show the albums that I have and my take on these songs. Of course, it starts with a song that needs no introduction, and I've mentioned this song so many times, and that is A Wider Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. This is an original American version with the poster and the hype sticker here. This is a promo copy, not for sale copy. I didn't get the single for some reason, and I ended up picking up the album in 1967. Of course, it's the most played song on jukeboxes and radio in the UK to this date. What a great, great song that is. Of course, Gary Brooker's really kind of blue-eyed, soulful voice and piano. Matthew Fisher, that great Bach-like organ playing. Robin Trower, to me, who left the band way too early, but he was going in a different direction. You have Dave Knights here. I think he left the band pretty quickly. And one of the most underrated drummers in rock and roll in the late 60s and into the 70s is B.J. Wilson. And if you listen to the live album they did, end with the Edmonton Orchestra. Listen to the drumming on that. It's incredible. What's great about these versions, it's very acoustic guitar based. And my favorite albums of Robyn Hitchcock are the ones that do have that acoustic guitar, which I think is most of them. And sometimes they're supplemented with other artists and other musicians. Sometimes it's him alone on a solo thing. And I've seen him maybe a half a dozen times over the year with and without larger ensembles, mostly acoustic, and bringing on various players. And I just literally saw him last night as of this recording at the Fremont Abbey, kind of an old, literally an abbey, beautifully played 2 nights. The place was packed. I'm thinking about 200 people like crammed in there in chairs in the back. And he had a beautiful, beautiful performance. The second half, he came out with Emma Swift, his wife, that is a great, great vocalist. And she's Australian. I recently showed the cover album. She did a Bob Dylan tracks. I kind of wish she had done a couple of those on her own. And they work really well in tandem on that. The second track is Itchygoo Park. Of course, The Small Faces. It was on this album. There are but 4 small faces. Throughout the book, he talks about picking up these singles. It was a time for singles. I was getting singles as well, but I think because I was in America or the situation, I got into albums really starting in, aside from the Beatle records, other albums around 1965. And so I was picking up albums when I could, still singles as well. Itchygoo Park, I originally got a single. I didn't get this album 2 years later. This is a later issue of it. There are but 4 small faces. This is produced, that song was written by Steve Marriott and Ronnie Lane. What a great song. As far as I recall, it's the first song I remember with phase shifting in the middle of it. I just loved it. And then I remember getting a single of Tin Soldier as well, I believe. But what a great, great, great record this is. And Here Comes the Nice, kind of a drug-related song. But Itchygoo Park, one of the great singles in 1967. And it's a great, obviously, a song for Robyn to pick. Next is Burnin' the Midnight Lamp. Now, this is from a later album. So interesting, he didn't pick everything from 1967. Of course, this is from Electric Ladyland. This is the original UK track cover. Jimi Hendrix really didn't like this cover, but, you know, that's the way it is. I bought that cover literally on New Year's Eve. Was it 68, 69? Or was it 69, 70? I forget right now. But snuck it in the house in a bag, in a brown paper bag. Didn't want my parents to see it. But I love, you know, the sound of that track record kicks ass over the reprise, and it's still as crunchy as it is over all these 60 years almost. It's such a wonderful, wonderful record. 54 years, I guess, 55 years. Then we get into I Can Hear the Grass Grow by The Move. It was only a single, but what a single it was. Roy Wood song. I only have it on this American comp. This was on A&M Records. I'm a big fan of The Move. Of course, The Move, Roy Wood and Bev Bevan, Carl Wayne, and then later Jeff Lynne would join, and of course Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne would morph this band into ELO, adding the cellos and strings, and then Roy Wood would leave after, I believe, that first album. This is an American comp, has the singles and key tracks, and it's a nice comp, and it's pretty inexpensive to pick up. The book itself really dives into this time of music. I mean, I love my childhood, and growing up, right place, right time for me in San Francisco, for Robyn Hitchcock around London, Cambridge. The band, the Soft Boys, was formed in Cambridge. His personal thing, how he never let 1967 go. I probably let it go more than he did, but he kept writing, gets a guitar from his mother, and he starts playing guitar, and that was it. There was no going back. I got a guitar, played in bands, but I kind of left it and went into other things. But music, God damn it, music was still, and still is, the primary thing in my life. And that's why I related so much to this book. So when I said I was jealous of Robyn Hitchcock writing this book, 1967, I think the main thing is I love sharing stories of that time and growing up in music and how important it is in my life. And he did it. I mean, he took a more narrow approach than I would. which really kind of got me hooked in. And the theme of this and the concept is brilliant. And I just love his personal stories and of some of his friends, and sharing music even with his family and playing the early Bob Dylan records. The next track is a track dear to me for obvious reasons. Written by John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas and recorded by Scott McKenzie. This is my original single on Ode Records. And that's sort of the anthem of a time. And that is San Francisco, be sure to wear your flowers in your hair. Big hit, obviously, not just in San Francisco. It was sung by Scott McKenzie at the Monterey Pop Festival. Years later, I did pick up the album version of this. You know, he had a few albums. I never really followed his career. It seemed like that song is one of those songs that overshadowed everything else he did. A little bit like Don McLean with American Pie years later. Not quite as drastic as that, but what a great, great song. He does a couple of John Phillips songs on here, and this was produced by John Phillips and Lou Adler. Again, acoustic bass, then he brings on these kind of sitar-like effects on it, and it works. It works. These aren't definitive versions here. Of course, the originals are definitive versions, but when you emulate these great songs and you have a personal stake in it, I think it's something that really is a wonderful, wonderful take. Of course, he ends up side one with one of the greatest singles of 1967 and of the 60s. And I love in the book how Robyn Hitchcock talks about seeing labels. He talks about artists and producer names and the color of the labels, the blue this and the red that and the black this. And again, one of the original singles that I have of the Kinks on Pie Records is Waterloo Sunset, the great Ray Davies song. Just a fantastic single. Years later, I would get, this is the UK copy of Something Else by the Kinks, and this album ends, the entire album ends with Waterloo Sunset. Again, a beautiful song. Ray originally wrote it as Liverpool Sunset, but with all the Beatles stuff and with Penny Lane coming out that year too, it just seemed too much to jump on Liverpool, and Strawberry Fields obviously as well. So he changes it to Waterloo Sunset. I think it's the right choice he made. Who am I to tell Ray Davies how to write his songs? But it was the right choice. And what a great, great single. And that ends side one of the album. So I'm going to take a little interlude here. I think one of his biggest influences, obviously, and you see it in his songwriting, a little more flowery. In fact, I think his songwriting, Robyn Hitchcock's songwriting, has more in line with Donovan than Bob Dylan, although he heard those great songs. He talks in the book about playing for his family the song Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. But again, he was getting singles where I was able in the States, in San Francisco in 65, to start getting more albums. He talks about this being one of the first albums he gets of Bob Dylan, bringing it all back home. So it was not simply just a 45, but what a great, great record, of course. He gets into the songs. He talks about the songs that influenced him. And of course, one of the great Dylan albums is this album. And with Like a Rolling Stone, became this anthem. And he goes through some of the lyrics in the book, talking about it, and just, I totally relate to this, and I feel it. I can visualize hearing these songs for the first time as I read Robyn Hitchcock's his memoir of his experiences of this time. I just love this, and of course, the great album, which is my favorite album as well, is Blonde on Blonde. My favorite Dylan album. Interesting enough, when he talks about 1967, at the tail end of the book, he talks about the only Dylan album that comes out in 1967, which is the opposite of all this flowery psychedelic pop and beautiful image-based type music coming out in 1967. He talks about the album at the end of the year, John Wesley Harding, how he's just not getting it. It's just not happening for him. And I can see that. It's when everyone was getting psychedelic and flowery and interesting studio production, Dylan goes to Nashville and sort of gets internal and records these folk and country-like songs. And if you're not into that, in 1967, it took me a little while to get into it. And I don't really think I noticed the song on there, All Along the Watchtower, until sometime later. But he gets that. He was disappointed with that Bob Dylan, but he loves Bob Dylan. Hearing him discuss the music and what it meant to him and the influence. Now, this stuff is the important things in life. I just totally understand that all through this book. Great book, great book. Time to flip the record. Turn it over to side 2. Robyn Hitchcock's 1967. Various color editions, I assume, out in the world. Wonderful portrait of a young man, possibly 1967. Side 2 starts with See Emily Play by Pink Floyd, of course, a Syd Barrett song. There's so much in Robyn Hitchcock's songwriting and song production that comes from those Syd Barrett early records, the early Pink Floyd, but especially his early solo records that have that kind of psychedelic folk scene that Donovan would come out. And of course, Donovan did it in a very commercial way too. And after his initial folk records, he would kind of mix it with folk pop, and Mickey Mouse producing him for those great pop singles, Sunshine Superman, Season of the Witch, Epistle to Dippy, Where You Love Like Heaven, and so many. I'm a huge, massive Donovan fan. And even when I was 19 years old and I went to Hawaii with my buddy Larry, Larry took a picture of me on the cliffs overlooking Maui, where I was dressed and had my kind of Donovan hippie look. See Emily Play. Now, he talks about these 45s again, and he talks about getting a single by Pink Floyd, the Pink Floyd then, called Arnold Lane. And of course, Arnold Lane, he looks on the record and he sees it produced by someone named Joe Boyd. I'm a big fan of Joe Boyd. I've spoken about his autobiography several times, called White Bicycles, Making Music in the 1960s. Essential book on Joe Boyd. American from Boston, expatriate, moves to UK, brings blues bands, blues artists to the UK to perform, ends up opening a club with someone called the UFO Club, UFO Club, in 1966 in London. The house band there is Pink Floyd, and Joe Boyd produces the first Pink Floyd single, Arnold Lane, basically about a transvestite. And when they get signed and they're going to put an album out, they have to use the staff producer at Abbey Road at EMI Studios. They had to use Norman Smith. So Joe Boyd, unfortunately, wasn't able to produce the entire Pink Floyd album, but he produced the A-side and B-side of that first single, Arnold Lane, written by Syd Barrett. Joe Boyd would go on to be the premier, in my mind, producer of the folk rock era, the British folk rock scene, with the Incredible String Band. A ton of their records he produced, almost their entire career, I think. Nick Drake, Fairport Convention. Years later, Maria Muldaur and Jeff and Maria Muldaur. So Joe Boyd is a name that Robyn Hitchcock constantly sees on record labels. He sees it on the Incredible String Band. He sees it on that Pink Floyd single. And I'll get into that a little later. They finally collaborated. Too bad it was way in the future in 2014. But See Emily Play is covered wonderfully here. Of course, that was a Pink Floyd song that was a single. It was on the American edition of The Piper. This is the original cover in the UK, Relics, Pink Floyd. It's a comp, and it has Arnold Lane on here. So you get the Joe Boyd produced song on here, but you also get See Emily Play. And this is a fantastic comp. Nick Mason did the cover illustrations on this. Just love this record. It's just a great feel and a great kind of early overview, edited down. Songs like Bike, another great Syd Barrett song. Just, you get a different feel for Pink Floyd. Totally different than, the Dark Side of the Moon's, the Metal, Animals, and that whole thing. And some people prefer this period, but this is the period that Robyn Hitchcock really latched onto. And I see Dylan and Syd Barrett as the two main influences, at least from my point of view, the way I perceive Robyn Hitchcock. And to this day, he's writing songs like this. Esoteric songs, colorful songs, things about places and times and people. Like, he latches on to songs like Eleanor Rigby and of course, other Beatles songs as well. And I'll get into that a little bit too. Then we go into My White Bicycle, and that is a song that I've never owned. A band called The Tomorrow. That was that first album by them. I don't have it. It's a rare record. Never had the single, never had the album. That's the only song on here aside from the Robyn Hitchcock original that I don't have. So I'm going to skip that one. But next, it's a song that I love, and it's a song I think probably the least known song on this album for most people. But it's a beautiful song. No Face, No Name, No Number, written by Steve Winwood. And that's when the first Traffic album here. This is my Pink label, Island Records. What a great record. Steve Winwood, Dave Mason, Jim Capaldi, Chris Wood. I am a huge, massive fan of Traffic. And this album, of course, with Mr. Fantasy. Is Mr. Fantasy even on the British one? It must be. If it isn't, I can't believe it. It is, of course it is. Heaven is in Your Mind was a hit for them. But Traffic's No Face, No Name, No Color. It's a very melancholic song. And he does a beautiful version on this. Next is a song that I totally forgot about because it wasn't a song that stuck out to me on this album. And the song is way back in the 1960s from the Incredible String Band. Another band recorded by Joe Boyd. In fact, I think he did almost all their records. Scottish band, the ultimate hippie 1960s folk band, bringing in world music and Indian music and meditative music and an interesting sound to them. I love the acoustic sounds on their record. I think Joe Boyd's production on their records is stunning. This is a CD comp. For whatever reason, I can't find that album, 5,000 Spirits, or The Layers of the Onion. I don't have that one album, so I need to kind of rectify that and pick that up. But I have most of their other albums, so it's for the sake of this video, I want to show these, all produced by Joe Boyd. I don't have all their albums, but we have Changing Horses, The Big Huge, We Tam and the Big Huge. I think that was like a double album originally, and they split it up in America. I could be wrong on that. And The Hangman's Beautiful Daughter. It's basically a hippie collective, almost like a cult. If you read Joe Boyd's book, he heavily gets into the discussion on this band. They never really made it. They have a cult following in England, bigger than in America, but they're really good records. The records are mostly cheap. 5,000 might be the most expensive one and the rarest right now. I need to find a copy for myself, but Incredible String Band is really interesting. It is esoteric in sounds, but the way Joe Boyd recorded is beautiful. And I can totally see a young Robyn Hitchcock listening to those records and really getting into that kind of, I mean, the ultimate hippie thing. Me coming from San Francisco, the Bay Area, Northern California, all things hippie-ish. It's the ultimate crazy hippie collective. And they became sort of this collective, almost, again, as I said, almost like a cult. But Incredible String Band, it's kind of a cool song. But again, I would have picked a different song, but I'm not Robyn Hitchcock. He did a great job on it, but it's not one of my favorites. Then he does his own original composition, Vacations in the Past. And it's a good song on here. And I think he really wanted to tie things together, autobiographical in a way. But that is a good thing. And of course, he ends up, and for me, this is my least favorite cover. And I wouldn't have chosen this song, but it's one of my all-time favorite records in the world. And that is A Day in the Life. Of course, everybody knows that piece of music. Fabulous piece of music by the Beatles. Closes out this record song-wise, aside from the little high-pitched dog squeals and the mumble-jumble here on the lock groove. If you don't have an automatic player. Of course, in the most important album of that year. And despite what people say now, 60-something years later almost, this at the time, I was there, Robyn was there, when this came out, this was the album everyone talked about that summer and that entire year. I think in America alone, it spent 11 weeks at #1. It invented rock criticism. It had one of the most interesting, bizarre, beautiful, expensive record covers. It had lyrics on the back that I don't think any other record at the time had. What an amazing record. Now, Robyn does it, and he does a good job at it. But it's such an epic record. Forget the song for a second. Forget the Lennon and then the McCartney middle of the song. It's such a great record. It's one of those records you don't cover. Strawberry Fields would have been better as a folk song for him to cover. And he talks about that. In fact, I love that he talks about the singles again and picking up Strawberry Fields Forever. Now, coming from an American point of view, we had it better because our singles, we had picture sleeves. This is my original Strawberry Fields Penny Lane. It became a double A-sided single there. In the UK, now this is not an original. This is a reissue of Strawberry Fields, and they basically came in plain covers in the UK. Now, some would say, yeah, but they didn't shove them on albums. So you had to buy the songs twice. Mazzy says, Magic Wings Tour is the best psychedelic album the Beatles ever put out, even though it was Capitol that put that together. But get the German Horzu pressing. That's the one you want. So that ends the record. Again, Robyn and I are a year and a half apart about. He was born, I think, in March 1953. I was born August 1954. We had these parallel things. He was growing up in and around London, just up by Cambridge, and in this wonderful mill building that the family renovated. I was in San Francisco and around the Bay Area, riding my bicycle to Golden Gate Park to see the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane and Janis Joplin and Haight Street. I was too young to be a hippie, but I was so turned on and excited by smelling incense and pot. I wasn't taking drugs at all then. And then, the whole idea he talks about, discovering girls and women and going through puberty. And that's why I totally related to this book. And this book and this record are special to me. But they're an incredible personal journey for Robyn Hitchcock. I will admit, I haven't followed through Robyn Hitchcock's entire career. I think I have about 6 of his CDs, maybe 4 vinyl records of him. I have no Soft Boys. I don't know why. I need to rectify that. There's only 2 albums anyway. If you have any interest in this sort of thing, look through that entire playlist. I believe I have them in chronological order, but I did not record them in chronological order. And every once in a while I go back to that, bringing out a story, a personal take with this important music. Because when you're 12, 13, 14, you remember that music. That's why, I may kid to someone who likes a Van Halen record or band over the Beatles. That's the generation that person grows up with. And I totally understand that. Of course, I wouldn't trade growing up with the Beatles for Van Halen in the late 70s into the 80s. But I get it. We all are attracted to the music and the things around us. Again, for me, perfect time, perfect place, San Francisco. But I just want to, again, do a shout out again to Robyn Hitchcock. If you're watching this, Hitchcock, thank you for bringing this to us. And I love the show in Seattle that I saw last night. And that's it. Mazzy loves you. Namaste. Can't even do it right.
Transabond